This is Radioactive Banana, and it's October 30th at 10:12 p.m. Thanks for dropping by. I really appreciate all my subscribers and all the people who come out to see my research. And right now I'm in the middle of investigating Afghanistan and the war and the mines and minerals there, but I had to take a break to look at these articles about puppy experiments funded by the NIAID, a division which Fauci runs. And so I began reading all these articles. And so I read the Miami Herald, and its title is Miami Lawmakers Demand Answers from Fauci Over Puppy Experiments. And then this article by The Hill, Bipartisan legislators demand answers from Fauci on cruel puppy experiments. Our investigators show that Fauci's NIH division shipped part of $375,800 grant to a lab in Tunisia to drug beagles and lock their heads in mesh cages filled with hungry sandflies so that insects could eat them alive, White Coat Waste said. And this article by National Review, Did Fauci Fund Abusive Animal Experiments? And this article by the Washington Post, Opinion, Why is Anthony Fauci trying to kill my puppy? And the Daily Caller, Washington Post columnist writes a defense of government-funded experiments on puppies. And this article by the Daily Mail, Cruel Fauci is condemned for spending $2 million on experiments which saw beagles debarked and trapped in cages so flies could eat them alive. Bipartisan fury at reprehensible misuse of taxpayer funds. And these stories of the puppies are just sickening. I have a dog. I love animals, so I have a real hard time with all this stuff. But each article was saying something a little bit different, and it was really confusing. So I decided that I needed to go out to the White Coast Waste Project site, and this is the group that brought forth the documents regarding these experiments, and they go after people who are doing animal experiments. And so I thought, well, let's go look at the documents and see what they say, because they're the highest form of information. Before I get going on the documents, I just want to say that this article here by Fox News, which is surprising, NIH acknowledges U.S.-funded gain of function at Wuhan lab despite Fauci's denials. Fauci repeatedly denied that U.S.-funded gain of function research in Wuhan. This story, along with the puppy story, is slowly leading us to a truth that's beyond Fauci, that's bigger than Fauci. Though I think Fauci is less than forthcoming, there is something even bigger above him that's controlling all this. And that's going to lead us to the Pentagon Bio-weapons labs. And when we all understand this, and we understand all the bioweapons labs in the world, then we need to work to shut them down. This is really important for us to understand. Now let's go through the documents that White Coat Waste has obtained. And this is their letter to the Department of Health and Human Services. And this is their FOIA request regarding that NIAID and NIH and their studies on puppies. And here's the information that they're asking for. And this is just so I can prove that there really was a FOIA request. And so here's one of the documents. And this document goes over 3 different studies. One is on mice, one is on rats, and one is on beagles. And this is a statement of work, and this is the preclinical development services for AIDS therapeutics. And this is task area 3, pharmacology and toxicology. And this is the statement of work for these projects. And under background, we see that there's proprietary information about the names of these drugs. And throughout the entire document, you're going to see that there's a lot of information that has been redacted. So under background, we have blank is an injectable liposomal nanoformulation of 3 antiretrovirals. And they're using this proprietary information in the animals. Upon completion of these studies, plasma samples were collected and stored below -60 Celsius at the contractor site to determine long-term stability and maximum length of storage of plasma samples. And so I just wonder here, what is their nano formulation? As doctors right now are talking about various nanotechnology and a product called graphene. And the graphene studies have been done for quite a while. You can go on YouTube and see doctors' conferences on graphene oxide and all kinds of studies by universities discussing graphene oxide and that they want to put it in everything. So I'm curious about what this nano formulation is. But I'm going to scroll down here and you go through the statement of work. Under this statement of work, this is pharmacology and toxicology studies to support the development of mitochondrial toxicity assays. So the toxicity of the mitochondria. And here, we're going to come down to here, and it says you're going to conduct good lab practice, or GLP, 28-day repeat dose toxicity in dogs. They're going to conduct a 5-week repeat dose non-good laboratory practice dose in the dogs also. And they're going to conduct a GLP 5-week repeat dose study on the rats. And they're going to conduct a non-GLP toxicity pharmacokinetic study on mice. And so there are good lab practices and then there are non-good lab practices. Now these products are for the FDA to approve. And the FDA says they do not approve of non-GLP studies, though you'll see later on that the FDA approves these drugs because I find the name of these drugs. And so you just see that there's rules just don't apply to some people. We have these rules that say that there should not be a non-good lab practices, but yet they violate them, and the FDA ends up approving these drugs anyway. So that's what they're going to be doing. And this is the dog study, method validation report for the quantitative analysis of blank in K2 EDTA dog plasma. And I believe K2 EDTA is an anticoagulant. EDTA is used for if you have brain damage, lead poisoning, and a variety of heavy metal poisonings. And it's also a food additive. And K is potassium. All right. So throughout this document, you can see that there's so much redacted stuff, but you go to the first page here of the dog plasma study, and this is the only place where they accidentally did not redact the drugs that they were using. That is just excellent. So let's look at these drugs that they're using real quick. Now this website is from the NIH, and it's called the National Library of Medicine, National Center for Biotechnical Information. And here we have information on Ritonavir. And what does it say? It's an irritant. It's a health hazard. This is an antiretroviral protease inhibitor. And it can lead to injury of the liver, and it can exacerbate the underlying chronic hepatitis B or C. And then we have Lopinavir, and Lopinavir is also an irritant and a health hazard. And it is another antiretroviral protease inhibitor, and it has the same thing. There could be acute liver injury, and it may also result in the exacerbation of underlying chronic hepatitis B and C. And the last drug we have is here, Tenofovir, and it says that it is a corrosive. And it says Tenofovir is an acylic nucleotide analog of adenosine used in combination with other agents in the therapy of HIV and as a single agent in hepatitis B virus infection. So it can be used by itself as a therapy for hepatitis B. So the other two drugs exacerbate hepatitis B and C, and this one aids in the therapy. So I guess it balances it all out. So I'm really grateful that someone forgot to cover these up. I'm sure it was a big mistake. But here's the main page of the trials here, and it was at an independent facility, SRI International, in Menlo Park, and you can see its sponsor was National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease that Fauci runs, and under the Division of AIDS. And so they hired an outside contractor, not a government agency, who has no problem doing non-GLP studies. And it doesn't seem to bother the FDA that they were doing non-GLP studies because they obviously approved those drugs. Now let's look at a little bit of data on the dogs. Now here we're going to look at this chart, and what it's going to tell us was some of the outcomes from these proprietary drugs that they used on the dog. And I want you to look at this area, which just shows you the group number, and there are 4 groups of dogs. And then over here on subject, and what we're looking at is hemolysis. And so you might ask, what is hemolysis? And this website is the Center for Phlebotomy Education, and phlebotomy is a person who takes your blood and studies it. All right, so let's come down to here. Hemo means blood, and of course, lysis means to rupture or the destruction of cells. So hemolysis is literally the destruction of blood cells, specifically red blood cells. So we learned a little bit about homeolysis, which means the destruction of the red blood cells. And so what we're finding in this document here is that there are trace hemolysis because of the study with these 2 drugs here. There is 1+ hemolysis. And so I'm just going to scroll down, and you can look at the group number, and you can see how many dogs have been affected by this. We're still in group 1. So you can see there's 1+ hemolysis, trace hemolysis, goes on and on and on. We're still in group 1 with the dogs. Now we move to group 2, and we have trace hemolysis. More there. Some of them, our results are below technical limit. All right, more group 2. You have this trace hemolysis, group 3, and then coming up on group 4. And so if the hemolysis is the destruction of the blood, then that means that whatever this 1 or 2 drugs are, that they're destroying the blood. And would it progress as the more of the drug that they use? The more they use the drug, would this progress more? Would it destroy their blood more and more? And this is a 2+ hemolysis and another 2+ hemolysis on 4. But this does say right here, this was 72 days, and so that was longer. And so it just might be that the longer you take the drug, the more you have destruction of red blood cells. So that is what I wanted to share with you out of this document. It is a lot of information, and someone who has more knowledge of science than I do should go through the whole thing and go through the mice studies and the rat studies and the dog studies more in depth. And I do believe that the animals were killed afterwards and they were studied, because there are organ weights within this document. So what did I find within this study? I found that there were good lab practices and non-good lab practices. Studies on mice, dogs, and rats that use these proprietary drugs, and when they used them on the dogs, we saw that they had hemolysis, which is a destruction of the red blood cells. And then when we looked at the definition of these drugs, they're obviously approved by the FDA. We see that they can cause acute liver failure, and that they are also an exacerbation of hepatitis A and B, and yet these drugs are still on the market. And of course, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases owns the patent on this drug and would be making the money on this drug. So now let's take a look at just one more document regarding some of the drugs from this trial. All right, here we are at the World Health Organization website, and the title of this article is Who Discontinues Hydrochloroquine and Lopinavir and Ritonavir Treatment Arms for COVID-19? July 4th, 2020. WHO today accepted the recommendation from the Solidarity Trials International Steering Committee to discontinue the trials hydrochloroquine and Lopinavir and Ritonavir arms. And we come down here and we find out why. These interim trials results show that hydrochloroquine and Lopinavir and Ritonavir produce little or no reduction in the mortality rate of hospitalized COVID-19 patients when compared to standard care. Well, this is a very interesting drugs to compare. Hydrochloroquine is on the WHO's top 100 necessary drugs, has been used for decades, and is an anti-parasitic. And then we have Lopinavir and Ritonavir, which are just new and have come out from NIAID, Fauci's department. And we find that almost immediately there's trace hemolysis, which is destruction of the blood. So which ones do you think made this study stop? I would think it would be these two for finding hemolysis. But can you imagine how much money NIAID would have made if this became a treatment for COVID-19? Wow, tons of money. Now, I was also thinking about this, and this is totally hypothetical Disneyland fantasy, but you could also not even do this study and put it out here like this, and hypothetically, the AP and Reuters could write up a story that says something like, hydrochloroquine studies stopped in mid-trials. And people will be like, oh yeah, of course, that's a terrible drug. So that's just hypothetical. That's another thing that this article could be used for. But currently, this drug right here is being used in the U.S. and other countries with success on our current situation. Okay, so that was the first dog study, and now we are going to go and look at the really horrific second dog study. Now here's the study that was done with sandflies, and so this is titled Enhanced Attraction of Sandfly Vectors of Leishmania infantum to Dogs Infected with Zoonotic Visceral Leishmaniasis, if that's the way you say all those words. And here are the doctors who participated. Most of them are from Tunis. We have a couple here. One's from Ohio State, and Hamilton is from the United Kingdom. And so let me explain this to you in layman's terms. This sandfly, which name is Phlebotomus perniciosus, has parasites within their saliva called Leishmania infantum, and they tend to bite dogs. And so this study is looking at whether dogs who have been bitten previously by this bug and had parasites within them, if sandflies were more attracted to them when they already had this parasite in them, or were they more attracted to uninfected dogs? So that's what this is about. One of the things they say within this study is that between 100 and 160 people are bitten by sandflies each year. And let's see, 100 to 160 cases per 100,000 with a mortality rate of 6%. And so their biggest problem is they don't have a vaccine for it. So they say they took dogs that were naturally infected by the sandfly. They don't explain how they were naturally infected. But they took these dogs, somehow probably let them out in a field during high fly season, Some of them were infected and some of them were not infected. And they brought them into kennels and separated those dogs, uninfected from the infected. And they did 2 different studies. And they were trying to see if odor, thermal, CO2, or acoustic somehow attracted the sandflies more to the dogs. And were they attracted more to the infected dogs or more to the uninfected dogs? They did 2 studies, one out in the fields and one inside of the facility. So let me scroll down and first show you this one. Here's the one where they put male and female pairs. Some of the dogs were infected, some of the dogs were uninfected, and then they had an empty cage right here. These dogs were kept in a cage for 9 consecutive nights during high fly season in a place called Ariana. And so then they tested those dogs to see if they infected dogs were bitten more than uninfected dogs. All right. Then they did the indoor laboratory test, which was this one that is horrific that everyone is seeing. And these dogs were drugged with ketamine and another drug. And what they did was they let out 200 sandflies, females mostly, with some males there because the males help make them excited about eating. The sandflies will bite the dog's body, and they suck the blood. And when they suck the blood, they may leave behind these parasites. So for 20 minutes, they let the sandflies out to bite. After 20 minutes, they removed the dividers between the cages of the dogs. They let the sandflies go wherever they wanted. Then after another 20 minutes, they put the dividers back in. And that was the test. And I'm going to move off this picture because it's extremely distressing to me. And so they don't say whether they debarked them or not. I imagine the debarking was for after this test, because the dogs that were naturally infected at the beginning of this study, it took them 11 to 14 months before the dogs began to show the infection. So I would imagine that they wanted to keep these dogs alive to see when the infection started and if they were infected. In the end, they find that they don't know whether it was odor or thermal or acoustic or CO2 that attracted the flies. But, other studies had showed it. So it was probably the odor from the dogs that had been affected. And so let's see, we have some tests here. Let's see if I can find those. Where are they? Here they are. So they have some charts here. And mean number of female sandflies attracted towards uninfected versus infected dogs under laboratory conditions. All right, so here you can see infected dogs. They were attracted more to infected dogs. They have another one here. Proportion of female flies fed on uninfected and on infected dogs under laboratory conditions. So you can see here in the lab that it's just a very minute difference between infected and healthy dogs. Now, in the end, like I said, they really didn't know whether, they really didn't know why the sandflies were attracted more to the infected than the uninfected. And if we go to the bottom of this document, sorry if I'm making you dizzy here. We'll go to the bottom of the document. Funding statement. EZ&AS receive funding from the U.S. National Institute of Health. All right, now if we go to the Washington Post, they will tell us that it turns out that this Tunisian study was erroneously attributed to NIAID. So that is Dr. Fauci's division, National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Disease. And they say this was not funded by Dr. Fauci, but this is an infectious disease. The dogs get infected, And then they have the Leishmania disease. So this is funded for NIAID. It doesn't make any sense for it to be funded for anything else. Now, Washington Post also tells us that they debark the animals because it doesn't follow OSHA rules for meeting too much sound decibels and, hurting human hearing. And that just disgusted me beyond belief. So the dogs are whining, crying, moaning because they've been bitten by all these sandflies. Well, that violates OSHA rules. Well, Washington Post, does Tunisia have an OSHA? I don't even know if they have OSHA rules. Why would it matter? They're not in the United States. And the reason they do these tests outside of the United States is so they do not have to follow good lab practices. Here's what I have to say. If I was doing this test, if this was my test, I would probably give the dogs ivermectin and hydrochloroquine to get rid of their parasites. So yes, you could naturally infect them. You could check after 11 to 14 months if they've been infected. And then you could look at different dosage levels of getting rid of the parasites. Doesn't that make sense? Don't you want to get rid of the parasites in the dogs and not see why flies are attracted to them? Who gives a shit? Now, the other thing you could do is figure out how to eliminate the sandfly population. You could figure out how to attract them to an area in which they will get stuck on sticky paper and it kills the sandflies. So why are you doing a test to see what sandflies are attracted to? But this kind of makes me think of the Pentagon Bio-weapons. So let's go into the Pentagon Bio-weapons. Here you can see a video that I had made, and it was called Part 1, Pentagon Bio-weapons, CH2M Hill, Battelle, Metabiota, and U.S. Army. And in this video, I go over a document called the Pentagon Bio-weapons Labs. And you can see on the screen right now, this is a picture I took, put at the very beginning with music, and I hadn't gone over this document, but you look at the title of this and you can see how pertinent it is to right now, and I just may have to read through this. But I didn't finish this series yet because when I got to this document and started reading that CH2M Hill was involved, it just really upset me, made me sick to my stomach. And why is that? That's because I used to work at CH2M Hill. It is a large international engineering firm, and I worked in a division called EES, which is Environmental, Energy, and Science. And this is how I know so much about mining, because I worked on mining projects. But I had no idea when I worked there that there was a division of scientists from CH2M Hill working at these bioweapons labs. And so I had stopped doing this and just didn't get back to it. So I just wanted to show you that, and it looks like it's a good time to go ahead and finish the different parts of these Pentagon Bioweapons Labs videos. But let's go look at this document. This is from Global Biodefense, and it says looking back at the biological threat reduction program through the decades. And this is the group that's actually in charge of managing and funding the bioweapons labs overseas that we have. And this is October 17th, 2021. And I've also found about 4 or 5 other documents that are now stating, in 1975, we passed this law that 175 countries signed that nobody was going to build bioweapons labs. And well, this is the year that we are going to begin to police them, because we really never made a policing agency, even though we said we weren't going to make these bioweapons labs. So it almost looks like to me they realize that we're going to come down to finding out about these bioweapons labs, and they want to get out ahead of it and make it look like, oh, we're doing great things. So let's look at some of the great things they've been doing to clean up the planet. And we're going to scroll down, And we'll start here. In Stepnorgorsk, Kazakhstan, the Biological Threat Reduction Program demilitarized an anthrax production facility and prepared it for ultimate demolition. In Russia, the program enhanced laboratory security to the Vector Institute. In Vorozdenia Island, Uzbekistan, the Biological Threat Reduction Program eliminated more than 12 tons of weaponized anthrax that was abandoned on site. In Tbilisi, Georgia, the program remediated a bioweapons production facility and established the Richard G. Lugar Center for Public Health Research, one of the largest, most technologically capable diagnostics and research facilities in the former Soviet Union. So these are some of the places that they cleaned up. And let's look at this. This is the Pentagon Bio-weapons laboratories in 25 countries around Russia, China, and Iran under the Defense Threat Reduction Agency and the Cooperative Biological Engagement Program. And this map comes from the Department of Defense. And so these are the Department of Defense's bioweapons labs. So our article just told us that they cleaned up in Kazakhstan, they had a cleanup in Uzbekistan, and they had a cleanup in Georgia. And wouldn't you know, there are bioweapons labs in those exact places they said they were going to clean up. Very interesting, don't you think? So they cleaned them up and then they built a bioweapons lab, of course, with our taxes. Here in Georgia, is this the Robert G. Lugar Center? I wonder, is it really a bioweapons center and not a public health research place? We're going to find out. But first, let's scroll down and let's read this: Global Health Security Capacity Building. In 2008, Congress granted the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program the authority to work beyond the former Soviet Union territories. Since that time, BTRP has conducted further missions in Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. The program developed risk assessors and trainers from human and animal health sectors and military health members across Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. So these health partners that you're working with, these risk assessors and trainers, did you happen to train, the biological weapons scientists in Tunisia at the Pasteur Institute in Tunis, where they did the dog, tests there? Did they happen to do that? I don't know. That's a question I have. And did Fauci know that maybe in Tunisia there was bioweapons scientists that he could count on? I'm not really sure. Next, let's go to the Pentagon Bio-weapons paper. This paper, the Pentagon Bio-weapons, is by Dilyana Gaitendzeva, and it's April 29th, 2018. And she is one of the top of the line best investigative reporters. She has gathered FOIA documents from the military to write this, so she has the highest source of information. She's just amazingly gutsy and brave for her work that she's done. But let's read a little bit of this. The U.S. Army regularly produces deadly viruses, bacteria, toxins in direct violation of the UN Convention on the Prohibition of Biological Weapons. Hundreds of thousands of unwitting people are systematically exposed to dangerous pathogens and other incurable diseases. Biowarfare scientists using diplomatic cover test man-made viruses at Pentagon Bio-laboratories in 25 countries across the world. These U.S. biolaboratories are funded by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. And I have to make a correction from the last paper. I said it was the Biological Threat Reduction Agency that funded these. And so it's actually the Defense Threat Reduction Agency under a $2.1 billion military program, Cooperative Biological Engagement Program, and are located in the former Soviet Union countries such as Georgia, Ukraine, Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Africa. And here's that map that I showed you earlier. And you will notice Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Philippines. Hey, weren't we at war over there? We were. Georgia as a testing ground. The Lugar Center is the Pentagon Bio-laboratory in Georgia. No kidding. And we thought it was, what was it called? Public health research. But it's a bioweapons lab, huh? It is located 17 kilometers from the U.S. Vaziani military air base in the capital of Tbilisi. Tasked with military programs are biologists from the U.S. Army Medical Research Unit, Georgia, USAMRG, along with private contractors. The Biosafety Level 3 laboratory is accessible only to U.S. citizens with security clearances. They are accorded diplomatic immunity under the 2002 U.S.-Georgia Agreement on Defense Cooperation. So with diplomatic immunity, you can fly around with a pouch that nobody can check. And we found from Dilyana specifically that entire airplanes could be considered a diplomatic pouch. All right, now here's the Vaziani military base, and 17 miles from that is the Lugar Center. Okay? And this is her discussion on why U.S. citizens need passes, and this is a clipping from a document. And it says the need to be a U.S. citizen and have appropriate security clearance is based on the need of that individual to have access to classified information or enter classified spaces. So would the public be going to these classified spaces? And this is DOD requirements for contractors under the DTRA program in former Soviet Union countries such as Georgia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. Information obtained from the U.S. Federal Contracts Registry clarifies some of the military activities at the Lugar Center, among them research on bioagents, anthrax, tularemia, and viral diseases, Crimean Congo, hemorrhagic fever, and the collection of biological samples for further experiments. Pentagon contractors produce bioagents under diplomatic cover. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency has outsourced much of its work under the military program to private companies, which are not held accountable to Congress, which can operate more freely and move around the rule of law. U.S. civilian personnel performing work at the Lugar Center have also been given diplomatic immunity, although they are not diplomats. Hence, private companies can perform work under diplomatic cover for the U.S. government without being under the direct control of the host state, in this case, the Republic of Georgia. This practice is often used by the CIA to provide cover for its agents. 3 private American companies work at the U.S. Bio-laboratory in Tbilisi, CH2M Hill, Battelle, and Metabiota. In addition to the Pentagon, these private contractors perform research for the CIA and various other government agencies. Just what we want, the CIA. Now let's move down, and you'll see she provides various documents here. Shows various agencies. But we are going to come down. Sorry about this, right here. Military experiments on biting insects. Etymological warfare is a type of biological warfare that uses insects to transmit diseases. The Pentagon has allegedly performed such etymological tests in Georgia and Russia. In 2014, the Lugar Center was equipped with an insect facility and launched a project raising awareness about barcoding of sandflies in Georgia and Caucasus. Yeah, why not work on eliminating them? Let's just barcode them. The project covered a large geographic area outside of Georgia, Caucasus. In 2014 and 2015, the phlebotomine sandfly species were collected under another project, surveillance work on acute febrile illness, and all female sandflies were tested to determine their infectivity rate. A third project, also including sandflies collection, studied the characteristics of their salivary glands. This sounds a lot like the dogs in Tunisia, right? They were collecting the sandflies and determining their infectivity rate on the dogs, on the infected and uninfected dogs. They knew that their salivary glands had the parasite in it. A biting fly in a bathroom of Tbilisi. And here's what they look like. As a result, Tbilisi has been infected with biting flies since 2015. These biting insects live indoors, in bathrooms, all year long, which was not the typical behavior of these species in Georgia previously. Normally, the phlebotomine fly season in Georgia is exceptionally short, from June to September. Local people complain of being bitten by these newly appeared flies while naked in their bathrooms. They also have a strong resistance to cold and can survive even sub-zero temperatures in the mountains. Biting flies in Dagestan, Russia. Since the start of the Pentagon project in 2014, flies similar to those in Georgia have appeared in neighboring Dagestan, Russia. According to the local people, they bite and cause rashes. Their breeding habits are in house drains. Here's Dagestan right here, and they're showing the location to the Lugar Center. Flies from the phlebotomine family carry disease parasites in their saliva, which they transmit through a bite to humans. The disease which these flies carry is of high interest to the Pentagon. In 2003, during the U.S. invasion of Iraq, American soldiers were severely bitten by sandflies and contracted leishmaniasis. The disease is native to Iraq and Afghanistan, and if left untreated, the acute form of leishmaniasis can be fatal. But you know what I'm thinking? Look at that. We have a bioweapons lab in Afghanistan and Iraq. Very interesting, huh? Were we building those while we were at war there, supposedly? All right. A 1967 U.S. Army report, Arthropods of Medical Importance in Asia and the European USSR, lists all local insects, their distribution, and the diseases that they carry. Biting flies, which live in drains, are also listed in the document. Their natural habitats, though, are the Philippines, not Georgia or Russia. Here's another document that she supplies. Operation Whitecoat, infected flies tested to bite humans. In 1970 and 72, sandfly fever tests were performed on humans according to a declassified U.S. Army report. U.S. Army activities in the U.S. Biological Warfare Programs, 1977, Volume 2. During Operation Whitecoat, volunteers were exposed to bites by infected sandflies. Operation Whitecoat was a biodefense medical research program carried out by the U.S. Army at Fort Detrick, Maryland, between 1954 and 1973. Despite the official termination of the U.S. Bioweapons program in 1982, USA MRIID, or Fort Detrick in Maryland, performed an experiment if sandflies and mosquitoes could be vectors of Rift Valley virus, dengue, chikungunya, and eastern equine encephalitis viruses, which the U.S. Army researched for their potential as bioweapons. Killer insects. The Pentagon has a long history of using insects as vectors for diseases, according to a partially declassified 1981 U.S. Army report. American biowarfare scientists carried out a number of experiments on insects. These operations were part of the U.S. etymological warfare under the Program for Biological Weapons of the U.S. The Pentagon. How to kill 625,000 people for just 29 cents cost per death. A U.S. Army report in 1981 compared two scenarios, 16 simultaneous attacks on a city by mosquitoes infected with yellow fever or by tularemia aerosol attack, and assesses their effectiveness in costs and casualties. Why would you be doing that? Why would you be doing that? And you know, Gates is so fascinated by these mosquitoes and seems to want to drop them everywhere, right? Operation Big Itch. Field tests were performed to determine coverage patterns and survivability of the tropical rat flea, Xenocilia chiopus, for use as a disease vector in biological warfare. Operation Big Buzz. 1 million A. aegypti mosquitoes were produced. 1/3 were placed in munitions and dropped from aircraft or dispensed on the ground. The mosquitoes survived the air dropped and actively sought out human blood. And here's some documentation that she provides. Operation Mayday. Aedes aegypti mosquitoes were dispersed through ground-based methods in Georgia, USA, during a U.S. Army operation codenamed Mayday. Yes, tests being done in the United States. Parts of the 1981 U.S. Army report, such as the mass production of Aedes aegypti, have not been declassified, potentially meaning that the project is still ongoing. Aedes aegypti, also known as yellow fever mosquito, have been widely used in U.S. military operations. The same species of mosquitoes are alleged to be vectors of the dengue, chikungunya, and the Zika virus, which causes genetic malformations in newborns. Operation Bellwether. The U.S. Army Chemical Research and Development Command Biological Weapons Branch studied outdoor mosquitoes biting activity in a number of field tests at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah in 1960. Virgin female Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, which had been starved, were tested upon troops out in the open air. And here you see some pictures. Military experiments with tropical mosquitoes and ticks in Georgia. Such species of mosquitoes and fleas studied in the past under the U.S. Entomological Warfare Program have also been collected in Georgia and tested at the Lugar Center. Under the DTRA project, Virus and Other Arboviruses in Georgia, in 2014 the never-before-seen tropical mosquito Aedes albopictus was detected for the first time, and after decades, 60 years, the existence of Aedes aegypti mosquitoes was confirmed in West Georgia. These tropical mosquitoes, Aedes albopictus, have never been seen before in Georgia, have also been detected in neighboring Russia and Turkey, according to data provided by the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. Their spread is unusual for this part of the world. And here's a map that she shows of Aedes albopictus and where they are located. Aedes aegypti mosquitoes have been distributed only in Georgia, southern Russia, and northern Turkey. They were detected for the first time in 2014 after the start of the Pentagon program at the Lugar Center. Here's another map. Under another DTRA project, Epidemiology and Ecology of tularemia in Georgia, 2013 to 2016, 6,148 ground ticks were collected. 5,871 were collected off cattle, and 1,310 fleas and 731 ticks were caught. In 2016, a further 21,590 ticks were collected and studied at the Lugar Center. Wonder if that has anything to do with Lyme disease. Weaponized ticks. New Jersey congressman asked the Pentagon to finally investigate Lyme disease conspiracy. July 18, 2019. There's been a conspiracy theory that the U.S. used ticks as a biological weapon to spread Lyme disease. You might not want to ask the Pentagon because it's a building, and the U.S. DOD is actually housed at the Pentagon, so that's who you'd want to ask is the DOD, and they're probably not going to tell you. But let me wind this all up for you. Let me just bring it all home, okay? So I'm pointing out between second and third base, and I'm just going to bring it all home. I'm going to bring in a home run. Are you ready for this? Okay, so in our first study on beagles, mice, and rats, we found that there were proprietary AIDS drugs that were used on the dogs. And these drugs, we found, 2 of them were irritants and a health hazard. One was a corrosive. And we found they could cause acute liver injury and exacerbate chronic hepatitis, as well as almost immediately the dogs had hemolysis, which is destruction of the red blood cell. But what's also very interesting about this paper is the nano formulation that was used for these 3 antiretrovirals. And I had pondered whether this was made from graphene oxide, because the medical field has been talking about this for a long time and wanting to put it in everything. Okay, and so then the second study I went over regarded the dogs and how some of them had been naturally infected with these parasites. And then they did a field study and a laboratory study to see if sandflies were more attracted to dogs who had already been infected, or were they more attracted to dogs that hadn't already been infected with this parasite. And they were hypothesizing that it was the odor that the dog was putting out that had already had the parasite. Because of that parasite, it was putting out the odor. It would attract other sandflies. Here's the thing. Out online, at other social media, doctors are talking about this thing we have to put in our body. So now I'm going to stop and say, now this is complete fantasy and it's hypothetical. My new science movie, that's what it is. It's my new sci-fi movie, and I'm going to tell you about it. So there are these doctors that are looking under an electron microscope, and they're looking at these various things we're all putting in our body because the government would like us to do that. And what they have found are graphene oxide and parasites. That's my new sci-fi movie. Now, let's say a human had a parasite in them, and let's call them the infected person. Would they be more attractive to a bug because of the odor they were putting off because they had a parasite in them? And would they be more attractive to a particular bug than, say, an uninfected person? I don't know. It's a good question. And in my sci-fi movie, there's these doctors who have been studying this product, and they have been looking at the blood of their patients and taking D-dimer tests on the blood. And what they've found is not only there's destruction of the red blood cells, but the red blood cells are stacking up on top of each other, and they've found graphene oxide. And I wonder if that has anything to do with the nano formulation, just like in this first experiment on the beagle puppies for AIDS therapeutics. And so from there, that might shock you, but you can go out on these various websites and you can go ahead and check it out and see what they have to say on these two issues. So what do you think? Did I hit a home run with that one? I think that was pretty good. But I think this thing that's going around is exactly this. I think that's what it is exactly. You know, the New World Order needs to play out the apocalypse, plague, and famine, and bugs, and, all of it. I don't know why they want to play it out, but this is what I believe they're doing. You may not believe it. That's okay. Remember that the Bible tells us they shall be known by their fruits. So what kind of fruits of his labor has Dr. Science and his friends produced? And what kind of fruits from their labor have the Bioweapons labs produced? Are they good or are they bad? But no matter what, this is really unusual, very strange and bizarre stuff in my sci-fi movie, don't you think? But for me, I take zeolite to get rid of heavy metals, and I use green black walnut tincture to get rid of parasites. That's not a recommendation, and that's not any advice. That is just personally what I do. Looking at these experiments that I've shown you in my video today, don't you just think you should ask, what kind of science is this? Dr. I Am Science says that we shouldn't question him and we shouldn't question anything they do. Well, maybe that's because what they're doing is questionable. Because whatever this science is crap. And it just all looks fairly evil to me. After doing my investigations, I've come to believe that the U.S. Department of Defense is the military-industrial complex, and the deep state is all the Fed agencies, all the politicians, all their mercenary armies, heads of police departments, these fusion centers. That's what it looks like to me. And I really think the good guys should turn and arrest the bad guys in every single country. Remember, at the beginning of the 1900s, the Rockefellers owned all the oil fields. They started the first medical schools, demonized natural medicine, started big pharma, bought up all the newspapers, controlled the education system by starting the first educational board. And in my Afghanistan mining part 1, I talk about the Anaconda investigation, or the Anaconda operation, and you can see that the Rockefellers were able to control the military. And to me, it just seems like above the US DOD, we find again the Rockefeller Group. Top of the shit pile has to be arrested first, because all the funding rolls downhill from them. And I've mentioned them before, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and all the others. And there's many, many more good guys in the field and retired than there are bad guys. So go get them, good guys. All right, so I am going to do 2 more videos on this before I get back to my Afghanistan investigation. And please go ahead and leave me comments down below on what you think of my hypothesis regarding this whole video. But no matter what, these Pentagon Bio-weapons labs, these U.S. Department of Defense Bioweapons labs, have to be shut down. There is no purpose. They've trained all these people around the world. Besides the ones that I've listed, I've found another document that said they were training people from 70 other countries. And again, so to me it looks like they could only be working against us, because all these scientists are working together. All right, I hope that you share this information. I hope that you found it interesting. This is Radioactive Banana, signing out.